Alright, implied domain or the maximal domain mean the same thing. Implied domain is a domain of a function that consists of all real numbers for which the rule has a meaning. Alright, let's have a look at an example. So let's say this one A. So let's say g of x. So we know that the x cannot be 0, otherwise it's going to be undefined. So x can only be all real numbers except 0. So that means my maximal domain. So x cannot be 0. So that means my implied domain for this particular function will be all real values, such that all real values are a solution to this answer except 0. Alright, now let's look at another example on this concept of implied domain. So let's say you have got h of x equals to the square root of x. So everything that's under the square root sign has to be either 0 or greater than 0. So let's solve that. So that means cannot be less than 0. So the negative of a square root does not exist. So therefore, it's going to be all numbers. So my implied domain will be 0 to positive infinity. Alright, let's have a look at another example based on this concept of implied domain. Alright, let's say we have got f of x. So my denominator cannot be 0. So that means everything that's on my denominator has to be greater than 0. So it cannot be 0. So that means, so any value of x that gives me 0 will not be a solution to this. So if I do this, so x equals to 2, so that cannot be a solution to this because that would be undefined. So that means all real values except, so my maximal domain will be all real values except 2. And that you can also use cas. So let me show you how to use cas. So all you have to do is just write domain, a bracket, and this one here, the fraction for x minus 8, comma x, and that gives you x cannot be 2. So all real values, but x cannot be 2. So that could be also another way of actually doing it. Alright, so let's look at another example on this concept of implied domain. Alright, so our next example will be something to do with this. Alright, now, so everything on my denominator cannot be 0. So that means if I factorize this, I'll end up getting this. So again, x minus 6. X plus 6, well, cannot be 0. So that means x cannot be 6 or x cannot be negative 1. So that means my implied domain is going to be, or the maximal domain, implied domain, implied dom It's all real values except and you can do that with your cast as well. All right, now let's do another one. So this time, all right, let's say we have got two functions together. Let's say we have this. Well, these are two separate functions. So this is one function, this is another function. So that means I can do both of them separate. So that means I have to say, well, x cannot be 0. So it's going to be a number greater than 0. So everything that's inside the square root has to be a number greater than 0 or 0. So therefore, x has to be a number greater than 3 or 3. All right, that's the first section. The second part of this function with g of x is going to be x 18 minus x has to be, well, it has to be a number that is greater than or equals to 0. So that means x is less than. So remember that if you divide a negative on both sides, the negative will, the sign will change. So that's going to be 18. So now, if I was to put this one here on a number line, my number line will be, well, because I can only take the values which are, and which they have in common. So if I was to put this one in a number line, so that ends up to be, which is easy to visualize. So let's say this is 3 onwards, 3 is included, whereby this is 18. So if I use different color, so let's say the 18, let's say somewhere there, 18, and that's going to be that section here. All right, now why did I use a number line? So it's just to visualize the section where they intersect. So my implied domain will only be this section whereby where they intersect. So this section here is the intersection domain. So therefore, implied domain will be the section that they both have in common. It's going to be 3 to 18. Because otherwise, if you substitute any other number, let's say you substituted here 2, for example, 2 minus 3 is going to be negative, so that's not going to be true for that. Well, it might work for that, but any number other than that will not actually work. So that means my implied domain will be only this section, and we can use that. We can try on the cast. Let's try that on the cast. All right, just write domain, and our square root function, which was x minus 3 plus comma x, don't forget that. So here we go. It's going to be only that section, that bit there. All right, and that's it for the implied domain, maximal domain.